the only man who does not need an introduction here tonight, Lou Laporta, is going to say a few words before we actually get started with the event. So, Lou?
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, and a good evening to you. I am Lou, obviously, in the Henderson Historical Society. We are really delighted to have you participate in the following second lecture that we have. And what is it about? It's all about Green Valley and how did it start. Copies of this lecture and other lectures are also in the back of the tables that you have there. So we've got about, I would say about 7 or 8 lectures to go on during the whole 2017. And they'll all be interesting. As before, I hand you over to Mark Patton, our moderator, who will outline the evening lecture. I've got 4, and he'll make that announcement. I want to say once more, on behalf of HHS, the pleasure that I see so many of you here today. I'm not going to say much more, except thank you for coming, and this should be one of the best lectures we will have. In the meantime, I'd like to mention we have a chairperson for the lectures, and that's Bob Kastner. Bob, would you raise your hand? There we go. He's the one that's been really busy with the lectures, and the rest of the season in 2017, you will probably hear about more of them. So thank you, welcome, and you probably will be participating with us this evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All righty. Just want to make you aware of a couple of upcoming events. March 18th, this Saturday, there is a get-together at Henderson Bar. That means born and raised, not bar. Sort of it is. That's at 2 p.m. on Saturday. So if you're a Hendersonian, please go by and say hello to all your fellow Hendersonians. And we also have coming up on May 17th, our next Henderson Speaks event. This one's going to be talking about the 70th anniversary of St. Rose Dominican. The 70th anniversary. That's pretty amazing. So that should be, just a wonderful event. I've had the great pleasure of meeting some of the sisters there, and they are a hoot. They are a lot of fun to talk to, and some of the folks involved will get a really nice review of how St. Rose came to be and what it has done for the community all these years. I do want to thank, on behalf of the Henderson Historical Society, our corporate sponsors. They are Brian Brandman and Dignity Health, Diane Saviano and the City of Henderson, and Mark Paris and the Landwell Corporation. And of course, we want to thank our titanium members. That's the highest level of membership. And these are people that give beyond what many of us can, but it is what helps us to function as an historical society. And that includes Rick Slater and Tronox, Tim Brooks and the Emerald Island Casino, Scott Mulrath and I'm probably mispronouncing that, aren't I? Am I okay? Good. Okay, thanks. Even if I am, you don't have to tell me. That's fine. I'm okay with mispronouncing things. I always tell people, if you move to a new area, learn how to mispronounce the words correctly. That's how you sound like a local. But Scott Mulrath and the Henderson Chamber of Commerce, and of course, Robert and Allison Kasner. Now, we have 4 speakers here tonight. You can see that because we have an empty chair. And that means that our 4th speaker will be coming in later. He had a previous engagement and he will be joining us later. But we will be hearing from each of our speakers. Each one will have 15 to 20 minutes or however long you need. You can keep going if you want to. Now, we're asking that you hold your questions until the end of all 4 talks. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and Bob and Art and Allison have note cards. They'll give you one. You can write it down. If you write down your question, we will collect those, and we will ask those questions at the end of the talks. If something that you hear up here makes you think, oh, I'd like to hear some more about that, you can say which speaker you would like to ask specifically. But if you don't have a specific speaker, you want to open it up to all the speakers, that's quite all right. We can do that. I have to say, and this is sort of a personal note, I moved to Southern Nevada in December of 1993, and I moved to Green Valley. It happened to be between where my job was at the Clark County Museum and my wife's job at the Water District. It was in the middle. It was a good location. We bought a house. We bought an historic house in Green Valley. Our house was built in 1987. So as the museum administrator, I had to have an historic house. And we're still living there 23 years later. And I was also here when Green Valley went through, some residents went through that period when they wanted to have their own post office. We were going to have a Green Valley post office. No, we don't live in Henderson, we live in Green Valley. And I had come over from San Luis Obispo, but previously I had been in Anaheim, where I had founded the Anaheim Museum. And I'd run into this problem before. Because in Anaheim, if you lived in Anaheim Hills, people thought they lived in Anaheim Hills. They didn't live in Anaheim. Yes, you did. And of course, as we know, the drive to get Green Valley renamed West Pittman didn't work. And we now have Henderson. We tried, yes. But it is one of those areas, when you look at the history of Henderson, there are many things that have made a difference. There are many people that have made a difference. But the panel that we have tonight are 4 of those people that were absolutely instrumental in changing Henderson and helping to create the Henderson of today. This is not to denigrate anyone who worked on Henderson previously, but the impact of a development area that numbered in the 7,000 acres, I believe it was, wasn't it? A little more than 7,000 acres added to the city of Henderson. That's pretty amazing. That makes a huge difference in how a city sees itself and what a city is. But this is an addition that has a very interesting history, and we are very lucky tonight to have our 4 speakers. And our speakers are going to be going in the order that I'll announce them. I don't know that they know what order that is yet, but it's not the first time that people have been startled by me. That's all right. We have just going down the line here, Mark Fine, Robert Campbell, Brad Nelson, and we will eventually have Brian Greenspun joining us. So we will have some very interesting talks from, inside the beats. These are the people that were there. They were making the decisions. They were the ones that were dealing with all the issues in order to create what we take for granted today. Just to get a sense so that we know for our speakers how long everybody's been here. Can you raise your hands if you've been here 10 years or less? Okay, 20 years or less. No, hold your hands up. Okay, 20 years or less. More than 20 years. I'm going to say that because I've been here more than 20 years, so I get to raise my hand.
It's all about you.
That's right. Hey, I've got the mic right now. It works that way. But our first speaker tonight will be Bob Campbell. Bob served as city manager of 2 cities in Missouri before becoming Henderson's city manager. He was here as city manager from 1977 to 81. He then became the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Green Valley Development from 1981 to 1985. As such, he was closely involved with the entire development of the 8,400-acre area. After Green Valley, he went on to serve as Public Affairs Director of Southwest Gas until 1990, and then created and ran the Campbell Company until 2010. He holds an MA in Public Administration from Central Michigan University and has been married to Patricia Campbell for 48 years. Very good. And I have to point out that he's joining us tonight from Coronado, California, a little cooler than we are here right now. So, and we thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate the introduction. I would say first that I think all of us are fortunate to have the Henderson Historical Society up and running and doing these type of events. If we don't know our history, we don't know the past, and we don't know, in some cases, what the future may hold. It all comes together. Mark mentioned that we came from Missouri, my family and I, my wife and two small daughters at that time. And coming out here was quite a challenge. The two cities that I had been a city manager in Missouri, one was founded in 1830, and one was founded in 1870. So as you might surmise, they were pretty well developed. There wasn't a lot of vacant land. And the winter of 76, 77, we had experienced a very cold winter, never got above 0 for 22 straight days. And I was promising my wife a trip somewhere where it was warm. I was thinking of Las Vegas, maybe. We'd never been there. And I got a notice from the City Management Association there was an opening in some place called Henderson, Nevada. So I looked it up, found out where it was. Sounded like a nice town. I did do enough research to know that it was a large city area-wise, but fairly small city at that time population-wise. That was attractive to me as a city manager, because if you come to a city that has room to grow and develop, it's just a lot more fun to be involved in that than one where your city is already fully populated, all the land is developed, and you're basically moving the checkers around on the same size checkerboard. So I sent in an application, and we came out to interview, my wife and I. We were picked up at the airport by the city clerk at that time, very nice lady named Dorothy Vondenbrink. Some of you that have been here a lot of years probably remember her. She picked us up in this old beat-up Chevy Nova to drive us out to Henderson, because the council had, surprise to us, decided they would interview me that night. So as we were driving out, I thought I'd make it a little levity with the city clerk, who I'd be working with if I was fortunate enough to be selected. And I said, Dorothy, they don't give the city manager a very good car, do they? She said, well, actually, this is the city manager's car. And so that pretty much stopped my levity for the rest of the ride. Had the interview, and it seemed to go well, and the next morning, one of the city councilmen, Phil Stout, picked Pat and I up in his car and said he'd take us around town and show it to us. Well, we toured the developed part of Henderson first, and then he took us way the heck out in the west, and we were getting asphyxiated on gravel roads and dust, and coyotes were running across the road, and that was Green Valley. And the mayor and city council at that time were very, very proud of the fact that they had this acreage within the city, all under one ownership. I tell you, 8,400 acres to develop under a single master plan anywhere in the country is few and far between. It happens, and there's some bigger than that, But that's quite a statement to take on the job of developing 8,400 acres. Now, there are two people on either side of me that know a heck of a lot more about that than I do. So what I'm going to do for the next few minutes, till Mark turns my mic off probably, is just tell you, much to Mark's consternation probably, some anecdotes and funny things that happened, and what I found enjoyable about having the opportunity to be involved in that development. I will mention, and I see her in the audience, I can't help but mention, one of the first people I met after the city clerk was the city personnel director. And some of you may know her. Her name's Janice. She's in the audience. She was one of the very first employees that was hired by the city of Henderson when it was created in 1953. And she was kind enough to become my mentor and advisor on items of history here. Now, I think in fairness, I should say she was only 5 years old when she was hired. I think I would be in trouble if I didn't point that out. So anyway, coming here and knowing that I would get to work with a city that had that huge an area for development and to be a part of making that happen, it really sounded great. Henderson at that time, when you look at the total city limits, it was only about 15% developed. So that gives you an idea of the city developed to the landmass within the city. During the time I was city manager, obviously I got to know Mark, and the events were happening in Green Valley. The first houses were going up. And I will tell you that one of the first things that I was involved in, the city was involved in, once we began to have some houses out there, was how do we provide fire protection? Because the fire trucks were in downtown Henderson, and that, you know, you'd have a 15-minute response time getting out there, and that was unacceptable. We couldn't afford at that point, nor could the developer, to build a huge fire station and equip it with very expensive fire trucks. So we came up with the idea that let's buy one of the houses, get a small fast attack pumper truck with about 400 or 500 gallons of water on it, so that if there was a fire, we could get it with the 2 firefighters with it, maybe 3, to get on the road, get to the house while the other help was coming, and make sure there weren't any people in the house and start the suppression activity. Well, that turned out to be a good idea. The firemen loved to be assigned out there. And frankly, the ladies of the neighborhood were quite excited. And they began baking cakes and cookies and pies. And we found we had to rotate the firemen in and out because they were getting too fat. But it was a very desirable situation, and that was one of the first real demands on the city that we had to make sure that we took care of the people that were pioneering that new area. After I'd been city manager here about 4 years, there were some changes in city government, and one of the things that was happening is Green Valley was really starting to take off. Mark and I talked, and he indicated there'd be a position there to work with them if I'd like to consider it. And I thought about it. But I knew that as city manager and leaving the city and going to work for a development within the city, there were going to be some people that would say, well, that's just not kosher. You shouldn't be doing that. And I had worried about it, so I went to my very best friend in the city of Henderson. And those of you that have been here at least over 10 years will probably know who it is, and that's Father Caesar Cavilla, the longtime Catholic priest here, and certainly one of my friends and advisors. And I went to Father Cavilla. I said, Caesar, here's the problem. I think this is a good opportunity. I think it's good for me, but I also think it's good for the city because I can hopefully help Mary Henderson proper to this new Green Valley area. I said, I'm not sure how to handle this without a lot of negative backlash on it. And he said, well, it's no problem. He said, we're going to have a dinner here at the parish at St. Peter's. He said, I'll fix a dinner. We're going to invite the community leadership in. Remember, at that time, we were a pretty small town. He said, we'll invite the community leadership in, and I'll explain to them why it's really good for the community that you go to work for American Nevada Corporation. So he put the dinner together, and Pat and I went, and the room was full, and we had a nice meal, and Father got up and said some nice words, and I don't think Mark ever heard this story.
No.
And so it went very well. And afterwards, why, Father Cavilla came up and said, you know, he said that was truly an ecumenical event. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, we had a Catholic priest holding a dinner so that a Presbyterian could explain to the Mormons why he was going to work for the Jews.
I'm proud you got all that out. That was good.
So with that, why, I launched into a new part of my career, and one that was really, really rewarding. Mark had laid out the position for me. I knew it was an area I'd be learning from him and other people at the same time I was working. It was clear to me at that point that Mark and his development team were using the best land planners and architects and engineers that were available. And if they weren't here locally, and since this was the first master plan community in Southern Nevada, there were some specialties that were not available here. And a number of those, Mark had coming out of the Newport Beach area, the Irvine Company, who's done some very highly respected master plan communities down in Orange County. And so I knew that he had a great team and that it would be fun to be a part of it. So that's what I joined. My hope was, as I said, that I could begin to mend Henderson proper with the Green Valley community that was to be. My first job, I knew that when I got there, Mark was going to give me a really tough job, just to test my mettle. Well, it turned out we were trying to get the Smith Shopping Center open in time for Thanksgiving Day shopping in 1981. And it was nip and tuck whether we'd get it open. And at that time, it was pretty big for a grocery store, 45,000 square feet. And we were trying to get it open. And I said, well, what's Mark going to assign me to do? Well, we needed to make sure everyone knew it was going to be there. We didn't want to spend a lot of money on advertising, didn't have a lot of money for advertising. So we decided we would invite all the car dealers to bring their newest car models, those that were getting ready to come out, 1982 models, bring them out to the parking lot at the Green Valley Plaza Shopping Center. And a lot of people would come to see the new cars and wander around and see the new Smith store and go in and buy a turkey maybe. Well, the job I was assigned, and fortunately I got Pat to help me, and that was to tie balloons on the antennas of all the cars that had been brought out. And Mark helped with that too, I must say, and by the end of the evening we had bloody fingers from tying balloons onto the car antennas. But it worked. We had a good opening, sold a lot of turkeys, we were told. So that went well. In the early days, as Green Valley was starting to develop, and I was still with the city at this point, I'm backtracking just a moment on this one. There was a developer in town, and I won't mention his full name. His first name was Harry.
I talked to you about Harry.
But Harry had, if there was a way to do a project and find a way to get it red tagged, Harry would find a way to do it. By red tagged, it means you were doing something wrong, and the city put a red tag to stop the work. And Harry was infamous for doing that in Henderson at the time. There was supposed to be a 16-inch water line serving Green Valley at that time. Well, what we found out was when those first houses were going up, there was not as much water pressure as there should have been from a 16-inch pipe. Well, when we got to checking it, we found out that this gentleman named Harry had done a little project of some type somewhere along that 16-inch main, and in taking his water off the main, he'd cut the pipe, installed his T to come out to his little project, and instead of repositioning the 16-inch pipe, it was probably a few dollars cheaper to put a 6-inch pipe within the middle of the 16-inch pipe. So that was our water problem. We got that settled. The other, one of the other things I remember, and when we were just starting to put the intersection, a lot of work, streets and everything else had to go in. We were putting the intersection in at Green Valley Parkway and Sunset Road. Those were just, well, Sunset Road was a rough, narrow blacktop. It wasn't paved, it was blacktop, more or less. And Green Valley Parkway had been primarily gravel up to that point. So there was a bulldozer down in that intersection getting ready to arrange for the repaving a new intersection. Somehow the dozer operator had not gotten word that there was another 16-inch line, but this one was natural gas in that intersection. The bulldozer hit the line, and it was shaking the ground for at least 2 to 3 blocks from that location, and it was spewing into the air so high that they had to reroute the airline traffic coming into McCarran Airport. Fortunately, the dozer operator was not hurt. The dozer suffered some damage. But that was certainly an exciting event. We evacuated, some of you have been here that long, you may have been in one of those houses that we evacuated that day that was too close to what we had to work with. So that was another situation when you develop a new community. The first office building we built was the one that's still there. It was, I think, one of the first reflective glass office buildings built in the valley. They were very unusual at the time. You see them everywhere now, but reflective glass. Oh, you can't do that, the birds will kill themselves. That was a refrain that we heard. We got it built. One of our first tenants in the far north end of the building was St. Rose de Lima Hospital, who put a nursing station and kind of a quick care center in the building. And we were really happy to have him. St. Rose was a quality name to have. I got into work early one morning. The building was very new, and they were certainly new in it. I got into the office early one morning, went into our office, which is where American Nevada offices were. Heard a lot of loud screams coming from the north end of the building. So I went running up there to see what in the world could be the problem. I opened the door into the St. Rose facility, and the nurses and staff were all standing on chairs. And I said, what's the problem? And they said, look! And there were small rattlesnakes wrapped around the potted plants. Quite a problem. I remembered that we had a firefighter on the Henderson department. Some of you may know him. The family's been around a long time. The name of Ernie Lamprey. I found out that Ernie had a dog that could sniff out snakes. So I called Ernie and I said, Ernie, you still got that dog? So he brought the dog out. We found the snakes about 300 feet away west. I guess they'd been disturbed as we were creating the base for the building. And he got rid of the snakes for us, and everything went back to normal. But pioneering an 8,000 acre project, you never know what you'll find. I want to tell one little human story about Hank Greenspun, which is obviously where the name Green Valley came from. Mr. Greenspun, I got to know, I think, very well through my involvement in Green Valley. There were times when he'd come out and climb in the car with me and drive around to see what we were doing. Always an interesting gentleman. And when we opened Quail Ridge Estates, which was a development Mark may touch on, we were told there was no way you could sell home lots for that price. But we did, and I was sitting on the Quail Ridge sales office one day because it was Easter Sunday, and I'd given the sales staff the day off, and I said, I'll sit on the sales office and go be with your families. Pat and the girls were out of town somewhere, I don't remember where. And I was sitting in the office, and Mr. Greenspun, Hank, came wandering up and invited me down to Mark's house, actually, to have dinner with him. So I went down, we sat, and I don't think Mark knows this story, but we were sitting on the couch that Sunday morning, Meet the Press was coming on. And Hank reached over and took a piece of paper and wrote some words down on it, handed it to me. I read it and I said, "What's this?" He said, well, he said, about 10 minutes into the program on Meet the Press, the guest that day was George Shultz, who was Secretary of State during the Reagan administration. He said, about 10 minutes into the program, Secretary Shultz is going to utter those exact words. And this was the days before DVD and all those type of things. And I said, well, that's really. And I watched, and sure enough, 10 minutes into the show, he managed to work those words into something that he was answering for the narrator. And I turned to Mr. Greenspun and I said, what was that all about? And he said, well, I was up most of the night arranging that. He said, that was a message to the administration and to Israel actually, as to the position the Reagan administration is going to take on such and such an issue that had been on the news recently, a fairly controversial one. So I had even greater respect at that point for Mr. Greenspun. I really enjoyed getting to know he and Barbara Greenspun as well. The first condo project, we were building some power lines. And one of the people living on what at that time I believe was still called the Showboat Golf Course felt that the power lines were coming too close to his house. And we'd looked at it, and we were within all the legal criteria and everything, and so we really didn't have any room to move them. On the way home from work one night, I stopped at Santori's Pizza, which was one of our new tenants in the shopping center, to pick up a pizza. As I was there, this gentleman happened to come in, and he pulled me off to the side and made it very clear that I would regret it if we didn't move those power lines. Well, we didn't move the power lines. About a month or two later, Pat and the girls that I had been away for the weekend, and as we came home to our home, which is on the Black Mountain Golf Course in Henderson, why, we were coming in about 8 o'clock that night, dark, and as we drove up the street, we saw several police cars around our house with the lights flashing. And we got there, and I said, what happened? And one of the neighbors had witnessed a gentleman with a machete cutting down every tree and shrub that we had around our house. Obviously, I could not connect my previous conversation with the unhappy gentleman. But we did lose all of our trees and shrubs. And the police chief at the time, we had talked, and he knew who it might be, and he said, would you like me to go have a serious talk with this gentleman? And I said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. So we didn't. The last real story that I'll tell, and then I'll let you hear from some real experts. The condo project that we were developing, same one I just mentioned, we decided we would have an open house. This is our first condo project. Wanted to have a really nice open house one Sunday. It was all landscape, beautiful. The models were furnished, complete furniture, and we wanted to really have a nice impression. So we had an open house. And one of the people who was touring the various models came up to us and said, you know, you might want to take a look at your model over here. I said, what for? I said, well, check the bedroom. Well, it turned out a very romantically involved young couple had decided to check out the bed on the model. And I could never prove it, but I think a lot of romantically involved young couples like that is why Green Valley has grown so rapidly over the years. But that's the anecdotes. Let me just finish by saying that I think Green Valley has been a real asset to Henderson. Henderson's an asset to Green Valley. They have, in the minds of most of us, become one and the same. I think Mark and his family did a wonderful job in planning it. I've seen a lot of different planned communities in different areas over the last several years. Scottsdale, other places, none of them are any better than Green Valley. I think people who live in this area are very fortunate to do so. It's one of the great things about it is it's the best thing that can happen to maintaining land values. And I think that's a big advantage to it. So with that, I'll let the two experts cover most of the areas that I'm sure I didn't cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. We have our fourth speaker here. Thank you, Brian. Our next speaker, not a problem. Our next speaker is Mark Fine. Mark was the president of American Nevada Corporation for 17 years, guiding the development of Green Valley for that time. Believes in the value of community and not just houses. Oversaw the development of open spaces, parks, libraries, public art, one of the things I noticed when I moved here, schools, as well as homes and neighborhoods. After Green Valley, Mark was also an instrumental part of the development of Summerlin for 4 years. This is, he also worked obviously on commercial and governmental projects. This is a man that's made a difference in Southern Nevada. So, Mr. Fine.
Anyway, thank you all for putting this together and for coming out tonight. I didn't imagine back in 1973, 74, 75 that we would be sitting in this environment talking about the history of Green Valley. You know, at that time, it was launching a community wasn't an easy thing. If you look back to see what Green Valley is today, and you look back, I was talking to people, I listen to people in airplanes, and they say, oh, I live in Henderson. I live in Henderson. I mean, back when we started, Henderson that wasn't the first thing you would say when you wanted to sell a house in Henderson. It's what has happened to this community, and I'd like to think that Green Valley played a part in it, but it played a part in the fact that you've had an amazing series of city managers. Bob Campbell did a fabulous job. You had a great city council, and there was a lot of things, the school district, there's just so many components of what went into what you see today. But I can tell you back in '73, Vegas was a whole different town than it is today. Where we may be selling 30,000 homes a year in Las Vegas, back in 73, 74, 75, maybe we were doing 2,000 homes a year. And Henderson wasn't getting the majority of those, I can promise you. But let me give you a little bit of where it started, because it's just, this goes back a little bit before me, but how the land was assembled, and how American Nevada got its name. And I think Bob alluded to the fact that Green Valley is Green Valley because of the Greenspun family, and Hank, who was instrumental in really seeing the potential of Henderson and seeing the potential of master plan communities, and really wanting, you know, he was in the newspaper business, he was in the TV business, but he really wanted part of his legacy to build one of the finest planned communities in the country. And he started assembling land back in the 60s out where the Paradise Valley Country Club is. And over the time then Henderson, back in 67 or 68, I'm not sure what the year it was, had an option or got the right to buy a huge amount of piece of property from the federal government. And part of it was they created a beauty contest. It was about 55, 56, 5,700 acres, I'm not sure it was. But there was a beauty contest because they wanted that property to develop that was going to be an asset to the city of Henderson. They just didn't want to be another land deal for a developer who turns around and flips it, makes money, and then the city never really got what they thought they were going to get. So Hank was one of the bidders. He was part of the beauty contest. But what does a newspaper publisher know about land development? So he went out and found, at the time, one of the best national planned community developers, a country called Penn Central, if you can believe the name, because it was formerly the railroad company. And he made a deal with Penn Central. They had planned communities around the country. And he made a deal that was never finally inked, because fortunately, before it was inked, the Penn Central company, who knows so much about development, went bankrupt. And had he signed the agreement, what you see in Green Valley today wouldn't be Green Valley. And then so he had to find another developer, because this was a beauty contest, and the city wasn't going to allow him to buy it unless he had an experienced developer. So he's introduced to a guy named D.K. Ludwig. I don't know if you guys remember a guy named D.K. Ludwig, but he was one of the first billionaires in the world, and made his money, and he had cargo storage and oil storage tankers and the tanker business. But he at the same time went into the real estate development business. And he started a project called Westlake Village in Southern California, just north of Los Angeles. He also had properties in Hawaii, and his name of his company was the American Hawaiian Corporation. So anyway, the American Hawaiian Corporation was led by Ludwig, but he had his right-hand guys, Bob Tatum, Paul Williams, Al Littman. They were his right-hand guys who were running the development company. And they pitched the city of Henderson, and they took the city council to Westlake Village, and they showed them what the potential was. Well, the city of Henderson was very impressed. They loved what they did, and they awarded Hank's group, which became the American Nevada Corporation, coincidentally to American Hawaiian Corporation, the right to buy this property. Ludwig, he never inked the deal, because Ludwig kind of took a close look, and he's one of the great billionaires, and he comes to Las Vegas. He says, well, I don't know if Las Vegas is ready for me. You know, it was still the early days of Las Vegas, the late 60s, and I think he got cold feet. And what happened was his guys, Littman, Tatum, and Williams, were so invested into this project, and they loved it so much that when Ludwig decided to pull out, they decided to stay with Hank and develop Green Valley under the name American Nevada Corporation. It was very heavy lifting. It took a lot of capital. Hank had Hank's reputation. He had the land. He had the staff of people that had the capability to do it. But when Ludwig pulled out, he missed one thing, and that was the money, because it takes a lot of money to launch one of these planned communities. And he was committed to do it the right way. And I think that over a couple of years, this was in the early 70s, when he realized that the lack of capital and the size of the market wasn't really ready to launch this project, I had moved to Las Vegas in 1973. We bought out those three gentlemen, and we decided that we would launch an effort to find a new development partner as far as we was concerned, and sit on the property and not let the property get away from us, because he felt a strong commitment to this community to make sure this property was held together and was developed, and he would deliver what he promised he would deliver. So that's kind of how American Nevada got its name, and it was an auspicious start, and it was a false start back in the early 70s, and we eventually went out. We talked to the Pritzkers. We talked to many different developers with regard to coming into Nevada, and the problem that Nevada had really was the difference between the dynamics of the market, which was maybe 200 homes a year, 2,000 homes a year, and the number of homes that they would have to sell to validate the kind of front-end investment it would take to launch a Green Valley. So we basically kind of reset our priorities and our goals. And back in the mid-70s, we sold off the land. We had to monetize some property. We sold off excess property on long-term notes. I don't know if anybody remembers. We sold out Rancho Vista Estates. It was 10, if you could believe it, looking back today, we would like to have that property back. But we were selling 10-acre parcels for $25,000, 10% down in 25-year terms. And the whole goal for us was to develop some cash flow to allow us to patiently develop this property so it could be launched the right way. And while we may have given up some opportunities on the back end, I think it gave us the opportunities to be patient and start to develop Green Valley in an orderly way when it was ready. So back in mid-70s, 76, 77, we were able to bring in our first builders, which would be the Collins Brothers, Pardee Construction, Metropolitan Development, and it wasn't Lewis Homes. I don't know. I just went blank on the third builder. Hal Ober's. Who did Hal? Huh? U.S. Homes. U.S. Homes. Thank you, Brad. And we started, and it was because we had patience. But at that point in time, because we didn't have a lot of debt, we could patiently develop the property. We made great deals to get these builders involved and get started. It was a challenge. We were in Henderson. I don't think anybody can appreciate. It's very hard for people to appreciate that the image that we were, 10 miles from downtown Henderson. We were closer to the urban development of Las Vegas than we were at Henderson, but selling a Green Valley with a Henderson address was a big challenge. And here again, by getting these builders in early, the builders were able to promote and sell who had reputations. They had a following. And we were able back in the late 70s to actually start launching Green Valley as a place to live. And we spent the next 10 years, I spent the next 10 years until 1991 when I left. We went from selling maybe starting with 25 homes a year, to growing it to almost 900 homes a year, and became one of the fastest selling master plan communities in the country. And everything we did was we tried to create value in everything we did. We built custom home communities. We built a whole array of part of being a master plan community is being all things to all people. And this was one of the largest communities and was designed to have probably 60, 70,000 people ultimately. We created what we call social engineering. We created little leagues. We created all the things that didn't take any money to do. But it was just amazing how we wanted to create memories for people. We wanted to create a place for people who wanted to raise their children. And without having a dynamic market and without having a market like we see today, it's really light years different. Las Vegas was an affordable community, and everything we had to do was affordable. We didn't have SIDs. We didn't have homeowners associations in those days, because anytime you did something like that, that became an obstacle as far as the sales. We went out, we worked with the school district, and we placed schools within the community so the kids could walk to school. Just as a little aside, it's not a secret, but in those days, they had busing. I don't know if anybody remembers busing. But Green Valley was in Henderson. This is one of the advantages of being in Henderson. And the school district, unbeknownst to us, decided that Henderson wouldn't have busing because it was a separate city. So it was, so instead of having K through 5, we had K through 6. Instead of our kids being bused into schools, what they call the schools, in the 6th grade centers, the 6th graders would stay in their own neighborhood. it was really a program that made everybody happy because a lot of people didn't want their kids bused to the neighborhoods, and a lot of people didn't, in the suburbs didn't want their kids bused to the center of the city. But it was an advantage of Green Valley, and just every little bit helps. We did try and get our own mailing address, which we failed. I think that we knew the postmaster. We tried to find, get rid of the negatives. But I will tell you that working with the city, when Bob Campbell was the city manager of the city, and then having come with us, it was a city that really wanted to be better. It wasn't a question, there was some jealousy as far as the Green Valley people versus the Henderson people, but the people that led the city, the staff, and the people that worked, that were elected officials, really wanted to make Green Valley, wanted to make Henderson a wonderful place to live. And I think a lot of things that we did, they became we built parks, they built parks. Because they didn't want them not to have, if we had it, they wanted it. We did it privately, they did it publicly, but Henderson became one of the best cities in the state of Nevada because they had leadership that wanted something better, and they differentiated themselves from everybody else in this state. I mean, I think they had more parks per 1,000 people by triple than Clark County and the city of Las Vegas over a period of time. They built senior centers, they built recreational centers, they built swimming pools. They did so many things to create a quality of life and raise Henderson's level to a point where they were considered one of the best little cities in the United States, and really it's not a little city. Anyway, we created a variety of housing. We wanted housing for everybody. We wanted people who could, affordable housing, move-up housing, second-time move-up housing, semi-luxury housing, luxury, we wanted a full array of housing because we wanted people to be moving, they could move into a neighborhood that they could move up in. When they got more money, they could move up to better housing. They could always subscribe to moving up. The library district came and they wanted to build a library right at the entrance to Green Valley, which we embraced. We worked on a public arts program. I think I was traveling at the ULI, Urban Land Institute, and I was in San Antonio, Texas, and I saw 2 tennis players in bronze, and I saw the way people gravitated to them, and I contacted the artist, and it was started, and they moved like 15, I don't know how many sculptures to Green Valley. And we created the Green Valley Arts Program. In fact, this little guy right here, who's got the hose spraying the other guys, was my son sat for that, Jonathan, who's a character, and if you know him, you know why he's the guy squirting everybody. That's Brian's nephew. But it was, we did everything we can to try and create a sense of community. Henderson was helping us, we were helping Henderson. We brought in the Shakespeare in the Park. I don't know if anybody remembers Shakespeare in the Park. It was a free program for the people of Green Valley. That they'd come out and they'd sit and they'd bring their picnic and their blanket and they'd sit out in the park, and we brought a company in every year from Los Angeles that provided free, and they were docents. They had kids come in and they'd teach kids to do things. So we did everything we could to make this resemble something that everybody remembered them when they were growing up and wanted to be a part of it. And it was a privilege for me to help to be part of that launch. I think that it helped, Henderson helped us, we helped Henderson. I think that we created a trend in Las Vegas that in order to compete, there's, the Summerlin evolved, Mountain's Edge evolved, Queens Ridge. I was happy to say I'm not promoting, but when I left, I went to Summerlin and I launched that project, and then I was a senior advisor on Mountain's Edge, on Queens Ridge, on Inspirata, and so many other master plans, in addition to being involved in the commercial development business. Going back to Harry Polk, just because I was talking to Bob about it today, he was a character. If you didn't know Harry Polk, he should be in the Red Tag Hall of Fame, because Harry didn't, no building permit ever stood in Harry's way from doing anything. My predecessors extended a line out from Henderson, or tapped into a line that was coming from Henderson, as Bob was talking about, and built this amazing pumping system because we were up on a plateau and we had to get the water up there. And then, as Bob mentioned, it was like, we couldn't figure out, we couldn't get water pressure. Like, we spent all this money, and we did everything we could, then all of a sudden, I think the city went out and they started scraping around and found out that, you can't take 16 inches of water and put a 6-inch line in the middle, and then 16 inches the other end, when you start pumping it, it pumped dry every time. And anyway, one of the challenges. One of the other challenges, and I think I filed my first subdivision map. Power company came and says, here's the deal, we're going to approve this, but you have only enough power for 28 homes. I says, we're zoned for thousands of homes. He says, that's all the power you've got. He says, if you spend $90,000, we can run a line, and we can get you 90 more homes. So we spent $90,000, we brought a line, and we got 90 more homes. And then they said, if you spend $300,000, we can get you 300 more homes, because we had to run a line. When you have, in early stages, you don't have the, we didn't have the money, but B, you didn't have the luxury of putting these big front investments out and getting any kind of return, because we just didn't have it. And so I think we spent another $300,000, we got 400 more homes, so now we got up to 500 homes. And then miraculously, the power company says, now we can build that substation, because they wanted us to pay for the substation. And they couldn't build spec substations, and which basically meant they're not going to go build a substation for us, because we're proposing to do homes. But once we had enough homes there, they considered it feasible for them to go actually build a substation, which at that point really solved our long-term power problem. We had long-term water problems. Everything was a challenge every step of the way, and it had to be managed. And what you see isn't so easy. We continue to, as Bob said, we thought we hired the best people we could find. We brought Bob in, and he did a fantastic job for us in terms of, as we grew. Brad Nelson, who worked for a company called HOH, up in Denver, Colorado, became a friend of mine. I met him at Urban Land Institute conferences, and back in '87, '84, we needed to have somebody at his level here to make sure that this plan continued to get executed. So the goal, like I said, Hank's goal and his legacy, and I was here to 91, Brian can take it from there, but was to build the finest planned community and leave the legacy and make sure that he delivered on his promise. And I'm proud to say, I think that, from our start through today's management, that Green Valley has become an example of what can be done, not only in Nevada, but around the country. And I'm very proud to have been a part of it at its inception stage and building it to where it was when I left in 1991. So if you have, we'll take questions at 9 o'clock.
Good. Well, our next speaker is going to be Brad Nelson. We're building up to you, Brian. So, Brad was the COO of Development and Senior Vice President of American Nevada Corporation from 1984 to 99. Oversaw the master planning, entitlements, development, and sales in Green Valley Ranch, Seven Hills. Involved a minor, 15,000 or so residential units, something like that. And 450 acres of commercial space. After he moved on from American Nevada, he went to Lake Las Vegas Resort, where he was the president from 99 to 2006. And then he moved up to Minden for a little while and finally came back. He knew where he was supposed to be. So our next speaker is Brad Nelson. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and be part of your Historical Society program. I'm back here because I've got some slides. I'm kind of a picture guy, It was a subtle. So it was easy to get him to move. I can see that. Yeah, I joined, as Mark said, in '84. I had met Mark with the Urban Institute years before. My first visit to Las Vegas, I think, was 1972. I came in on a consulting job for Fred Sproul. Does anybody know that name? Red Arrow Homes, way up in the Northwest. So I go way back in my career to Sproul Homes, 1972. And stayed in touch with Las Vegas over the years, met Mark, as we said. I came down for a meeting with Mark before I was hired, and they were in the new office building. And I was sitting there looking at some things and watching the wind blow, and my wife called and said, "How's the weather?" I said, "Oh, it's really nice and warm." She said, "Windy?" I said, "No, it's just a breeze." That was the day the construction trailer blew off the wheels out in front of the building, and she never let me live that one down. And then, so I joined in '84. As you indicated, I worked with primarily development and design, working with the consulting engineers and so forth, and put together some slides of some of the, what I call groundbreaking ideas that Green Valley had. And I have to tell you that the commitment that the family made over the years was just amazing. When I was offered the job, I called a former classmate in LA and said, "I've got this opportunity in Henderson." He said, "Oh my God, you're going to Henderson?" I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I told him, and he said, "I'll call you back." He called me back and said, "If you're going to work with that family, don't worry about it. It's probably a great opportunity." So that was a reinforcement of what I thought was a great opportunity. So I took it and arrived here August 1st of '84. I think it was 103 the day we moved into our house. So, I put together some slides, as I said. Mark made note of this, but the slide, or the scene on the left there, that Green Valley sign, that was the original Green Valley entrance sign at Sunset and Green Valley Parkway when I arrived. That's now down at Via Verde and Sunset. There's a couple little shopping centers, gas station down there, and those signs are down there. We moved them from here when we came up with this. This is actually part of there's a sculpture garden right in here if you've ever taken time to walk through. There's a big obelisk that's in the back that was done by an artist named, I think it was Lita Albuquerque. There's a big landform sculpture that's out in the grass area just to the south of this. So if you get up there, you can see some of the original art. This was originally built with the library, so it was early Green Valley when this arts program started, as Mark mentioned, that he sponsored with J. Seward Johnson. I brought in slides of the ones that displays are out front, just quick reference. Original assemblage, I thought it was 78, but I guess it was even before that. So that was the original boundary. If you can see it, you can see the Showboat Country Club up at the top. This was a graphic that we put together as part of our marketing program that shows where the 8,400 acres laid out in the city. So you can see it goes all the way out. This is eastern over here. And as you'll see in a minute, some of the land that's out near Seven Hills, when we were developing out there, we looked at the old title reports and it said, oh, American Nevada owned this land way back when, but it had been sold off, as Mark mentioned, as part of the early program to get funds, cash flow into the project. So some of these sort of edge areas were sold off. Oops, sorry. And this is a very recent photo, so you can see here's all the Green Valley Ranch, which effectively most of the ranch residentially was built out around 99, 2000. Commercial areas took a little longer, but they finished out soon after that. This was the Sun City project here. So you can see how it went from the late 70s to the early 2000s. Here were some of the original home builders Mark was talking about, but this was the Green Valley Village Green was the first condo project, but in those time frame, U.S. Home, Party, and Green Valley Homes, which actually when the home building was starting in one of the newer areas, Mark and all said, you know, we need to prime the pump a little bit, so why don't we get Green Valley Homes going? And so Green Valley Homes was instrumental in showing the way to other home builders. and eventually got out of the business because that really wasn't our main business. It was land development and so forth. So, and then there was an older company called Metropolitan, and then there were RS and RA Homes. They were early builders. Plaster Development, Stanton Construction. So those are some of the first phase builders that we had. Then we got into, I would say, showing the market what a village really was. So we started with some of the areas that we called Fox Ridge Estates, or Fox Ridge, and in that was Green Valley Homes, who went in and built 0 lot line homes, which was first time in Las Vegas. Fox Ridge Park, which Mark mentioned, it was about a 4.5 acre park, and it was built right next to what was eventually Estes McDaniel School. And the park was where the first, was the area where the first Shakespeare in the Park actually happened. Beyond that, then we went into what we called these villages, and the first real village was Silver Springs, and that's basically from the railroad tracks, the UP line south, down to about Windmill. And so in this area, what was really groundbreaking, and I don't think you'll ever find another master plan locally that has church sites in it. And one of the parts of building the community was we have to reserve land for churches and synagogues, which has been done through the balance of Green Valley. But also, we had an earth-sheltered school. If you go by the James Gibson School that's in the village of Silver Springs, it's actually half buried. So we worked out an arrangement with the school district. They wanted to do a pilot program that said, what if we do earth sheltering? How does it impact the operating costs of the school? So when you go by that school, that's why it looks the way it does. Also in the village was a private elementary school. It was down on the corner of Windmill and Green Valley Parkway. And the name has changed, and I think it might be now just a daycare center, but it started out as a private elementary school. But we also have the Methodist Church, a Baptist church in the village. Then we built the second of the custom home neighborhoods, which was the Fountains. And then the Silver Springs Rec Center, and let's see if I get a picture of that. When we started, as Mark said, the idea of HOAs, homeowners associations, was taboo. And I would go around and meet with the various builders in town and said, what do you think of the idea we build a village where we have open space, common area, and then there's a small fee? And they said, I don't even want to talk about it. So it was kind of dead in the water, but we said, you know, we're going to go ahead and try it. So if you drive through the village of Silver Springs, you'll see green belts along the roads where there's trees and landscaping, and the walls are set back. It's not the street, the sidewalk, and a wall. It's the street, the sidewalk, and 10 or 20 feet before you get to the wall, and there's landscaping. So that was the HOA area. Then we said, in the middle of this area, on the north side of Pittman Wash, we think we'll build a neighborhood recreation center. So we went ahead, started to build that, and we talked about it with the city, and the city came back and said, you know what, that is really a neat idea. We really like that idea, and what if we, the city, took it over from you and made it public after you build it? And we said, well, that kind of gets rid of the whole issue with the HOA. He said, yeah, and so there was a Councilman Ron Hubel, if you remember that name. He was instrumental in the communication between the city and us to say the recreation center that's there is part of the city. And that, I believe, was the first rec center of that scale, and since then there's been Lorna Custerson and others. And if you haven't been there, you may never have seen this. This is a little amphitheater that sits out behind the rec center along the side of Pittman Wash. And it's a very secluded, kind of quiet place. And we built the trail along the wash. And in dealing with some of the city engineers, they said, well, it's a floodway, it should be paved, you know, concrete sides. And we said, no, that's not our concept. We'd like to leave it natural. And they said, well, you can build those concrete walls, you can fill in up to the wall, you get more land to sell. We said, no, that's not the kind of community we want. So Pittman Wash was left natural through Green Valley, and then I know the city carried the concept farther in either direction. And we also built a trail along the side, which you can see in the bottom of the picture. And that trail system now is part of was the original part of the Pittman Wash system. And that goes all the way across town, I believe. And I've seen comments from people that said this is one of the best trail systems in the whole Clark County system. And it was really originated here in Green Valley with this side of the Pittman Wash. And then the rec center itself, we built the first, I think it was 3,000 square foot building, pool, and tennis courts. The city came in and added the gymnasium and a lot of the extra space. So it's a much larger building than what we built. But it was the idea that it was there for the community, and I think the community really enjoys it. We, around the time when we were doing Silver Springs, we went to UNLV and said, would you do a survey for us and just see how many people like living in Green Valley and would they like to live here again? So UNLV did a survey, it didn't mention us, but it came back and said that 95% of the people who lived in Green Valley at the time wanted to live in Green Valley continually. And if they had a chance to move, they would stay in Green Valley. So we were really pleased, and it really supported the kinds of concepts we were pushing through. So the groundbreaking ideas in Green Valley, again, we had multi-builder, those lists of builders we showed, and multi-product, as Mark mentioned, from starter homes up to custom homes. So we weren't, sort of a one-horse pony kind of a place. Then the multi-use neighborhoods. The Silver Springs started it particularly with the churches, recreation, open space, and so forth. The Legacy Village continued that. That's where the Legacy Golf Club is. And of course, the ranch continued it even more. The schools and parks were naturally sited together, and the schools got bigger to 10 acres, and the parks got bigger to 10 acres. And so the Fox Ridge, which was originally done on less than 9 acres, school and park, started things, but in the future areas we had more in the 10 to 20 or 20 acre sites of schools and parks mixed together. Again, churches and synagogues. And one of the things that was, I'll say it was new here in the 80s, when we were starting into the villages, we said the streets in town are too wide, and some of the old neighborhoods you drive through, the streets are 60 feet wide. You could run 5 lanes of cars down these streets, and it's just a single-family neighborhood. And we said, that doesn't help our concept. We like narrower streets, slower traffic. So we went in and proposed to get down to 48 feet as our first attempt. I went to the city council meeting and proposed it as part of our next map, and Carlton Lawrence said, you're not bringing that kind of stuff to Henderson. We don't want that here. We want to do with what we've got now. So he was eventually persuaded to agree. And now the streets are much longer, or much narrower than 48. Yeah, I think it might have been. So, one of the other things in Green Valley you'll find, compared to a lot of other places, there's very limited retail. There are, on a typical intersection, there might be one commercial or there might be none. And there's several where there's none. There may be some office buildings close, but you won't find shopping centers on every corner. And that was one of the early concepts that the family had, that this is the kind of community we want. And I have to ask Brian, but the story was there were no gas stations, right? There were none. Now there's the one in Smith Center. But that was one of the original concepts. No gas stations in Green Valley. If you have to buy gas, you buy it on your way to work before you get home. But we don't provide it. And then again, community centers and community facilities. As Mark mentioned, fire stations. We did a lot of fire station work, and we got into building the whole facility and providing all the trucks and doing everything, which those are things that the city required, which we kind of grudgingly provided. Then the last big community, last big village was Green Valley Ranch. 1993 is when it broke ground. So it was the south side of what is now the freeway. And when I first started going to city council meetings in '84, we lived in Green Valley, and my wife would say, you got to be really careful. That's a long, dark road all the way down to the city. There's no street lights. Be careful if you break down. How are you going to, the whole thing. Because the Henderson Highway was 2 lanes out in the middle of nowhere. Of course, now it's a freeway. And a lot of younger people particularly don't even remember what it used to be like. But the district and the character of the ranch really was raised up a level. We had to compete with Summerlin Park and other places that were also building kinds of communities that we were building. So we weren't the only one anymore, so we had to really push the envelope again, saying that the residential, we had these much larger entry statements, much larger programs as far as community facilities, and because of the location here, of course, there was the hotel casino potential to be built, and that's where the Sunset Station was. So just more of the signage and the character of the community. Here's the original master plan of the town center, which we'll call it, where the district is located, but this showed the new freeway that was going to come through, where the hotel was going to be. This is the district where it was going to be. All the corporate center, which is the area to the north, and then this area, which is now apartments, and the sort of east part of the district. So that was done in 96. So from the original concepts, and I think Mark alluded to it, it takes so long to get these things put together, and it requires so much work and commitment to make it happen that most people don't really realize what it takes. And there was a picture, again in 96, of what was happening around the area where the actual district was going to be developed, and then we had submitted a second master plan, which was, here's the district master plan, blown up so you can see the original plans for the district. And that's where the district is, that's the Sunset Station. And these are offices, and there's a restaurant there. But some of those plans changed over time, and I think the district went through a phase of, should we build the district or not? And it went to other concepts. I know it was a neighborhood center at one time was thought about, and that was scrapped and came back to the district. So eventually the district was built as you see it. One of the other things that was part of that district master, I should say the ranch master plan, was Liberty Point. And ANC actually prepared the original master plans for all of this site, 40 acres, which included the amphitheater, the senior center, all those different multi-use, public multi-uses. There's the police station, multi-use, Gen Center, and all that in there. So we put all that together and provided it to the city. They took it over. We said, we'll give you the land, which we did. And they took it over at that point, and they built what's there today. They changed our plans a little bit, moved things around, but it's basically what we thought was what the community needed. And then I'll close with just a reminder that, again, in the mid-90s, ANC bought back into Seven Hills. It had been sold. It was developed by Forest City out of Cleveland, and they came back to us and said, we really need a developer. You guys know the area, so why don't we partner up? So ANC bought back into Seven Hills in the mid-90s, and then was there to finish out the land development of the housing sales and custom home lots in that area. So that's a pictorial history of Green Valley.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, our next speaker and final speaker tonight, but by no means final in the story being told, is Brian Greenspun. You can't talk about Green Valley without talking about Brian's dad, who began the project that became what it is today. Brian is the publisher and editor of the Pulitzer Prize-winning Las Vegas Sun. See, I looked it up. I made sure of that. He is the chairman and CEO of Greenspun Media Group. He's served on Bill Clinton's White House Commission on Small Business and Barack Obama's Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad. I want to talk to you about that because I think that's interesting. But I work in museums. I think heritage is a good thing. He's the director of Barrick Gold Corporation, a trustee of the Brookings Institute, the UNLV Foundation, and the Simon Wiesenthal Museum of Tolerance. His father began acquiring the property in what would become Green Valley in the mid-1950s. That's a little bit of a vision. And eventually acquiring 3,500 acres before eventually getting the other 4,700 from the city. So I think we're going to hear now the real inside story of the vision that created what we think of and just accept as Green Valley today. Brian.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Pardon me for sitting down. I'm an old man, and I need my rest. Well, it's just easier for me to see my notes, most of which have already been discussed. First of all, you've been hearing from three of probably the senior players in what was and is Green Valley. We wouldn't be sitting here, and I know how far away from Green Valley we are. We would not be sitting here if it weren't for Bob Campbell, certainly on behalf of the city at the time, and Mark, and then Brad, basically doing the really hard, difficult work that Mark talked about. The stuff that costs a lot of money when you don't have any money, and you get a lot of slings and arrows because everyone knows more than you know and is free to tell you about it on a daily basis. And you got to keep plowing through that when you have a vision. So the reason we wouldn't be sitting here is because Henderson, in my view, would not be what it is had it not been for Green Valley. So thank you three very, very much. As Mark said, I got involved. I was just minding my own business in the newspaper business when Mark decided to go to Summerlin for whatever reason. How's that? And so I became a developer overnight and did a really lousy job. But there are a few things that happened, I can say, on my watch. I'm not going to take credit for it because all I did was learn how to say yes instead of no to some really smart people. But the district and Green Valley Ranch and the Green Valley Ranch Hotel, I can't take credit for Sunset Station, nor would I. But Green Valley Ranch was an idea that we had, and we convinced our partners, the Fertittas, to step up and build something really, really nice. And of course, that led them to build something even nicer and nicer. And that's the way this thing goes. But you know, there's a whole lot to talk about Green Valley. I'd rather, if you don't mind, just spend a few minutes on how the hell it happened. Because, as Mark said, and then Brad alluded to, there was a dark road from here to Henderson that probably had just gotten paved when he got here. And when Mark got out here in the early 70s, it was anything but green. It was more like Brown Valley, Dirt Valley. But long, long before that, when my dad moved to town, he was studying for the bar. This is back in the late 40s. He was studying for the bar exam, and he needed to make a living. So he ran into a fellow who he went to law school with, a guy by the name of Ralph Pearl, who was a marvelous writer and didn't have much in the way of vision. But he had convinced my father that they should get into the publication business. And so they started a magazine called Las Vegas Life. So my dad said, okay, I'm the publisher, you be the entertainment editor. So Ralph said, great. And I'm going to tell you this story just to talk about vision for a moment. And so, you know, they started this magazine. It never made a penny. In fact, it lost money all the time until my dad ran into Bugsy Siegel one day. And Siegel was torn for a moment whether to kill him or to thank him, because my dad had written an article about Siegel in this magazine, and he didn't call him Bugsy, he called him Benjamin. He didn't call him a hoodlum. He said he lived on the periphery of polite society. And for a guy like Siegel, you know, that went right to his head, and he loved it. He had no idea who this Hank Greenspun was until he met him one day on a staircase, and they banged into each other. Siegel went into his jacket for his gun, and he said, "Who are you?" And my dad stuck his hand out and said, "I'm Hank Greenspun." He said, "You're the guy who wrote that great article about me." He put his hand back in the gun back in the holster. He said, "Is the back page of that magazine available?" My dad said, "Every week for the rest of the year." And Siegel that day paid him cash for the rest of the year, and it's the only thing that kept the magazine going. The result of that was, and that magazine venture, my dad got a pretty good glimpse in the late 40s what Las Vegas could become. Now remember, you don't remember, most of you weren't here. I was barely here. There was an El Rancho Hotel, and there was a Last Frontier Hotel, and that was it. Everything you see out there was dirt. But my dad could see that with the coming of this Flamingo Hotel, and the idea that people could come from all over the world to gamble in those days, entertainment was part of it, but it was a small part of it, he could see a growth, he could see a future in Las Vegas. So when he got together with Ralph Pearl, he said to Ralph, "This town's going to take off, buy land." Now, of course, none of them had any money. I remember once I was driving down the strip with my dad, probably around 1962 or 63, years before Caesars was built. Or no, it was about 66. Caesars was under construction. And he said, "You know, I could have owned all the land from what was the El Rancho all the way to Caesars." I said, "You could?" He says, "Yep, could have had it for $500 an acre." I said, "Well, why didn't you buy it?" He said, "I didn't have $5 an acre." Well, nobody did. But the point is, when we were driving down in the mid-60s, it was no longer $500 an acre. It was probably $5,000 a running foot. And then it went up to millions and millions of dollars an acre. But he said to Ralph, "Ralph, this town is going to take off. Buy land. That's the only way you're going to be able to invest and take part in what's coming." So Ralph came to my dad after the magazine was over. My dad got into the newspaper business in 1950, and of course he made Ralph the Hollywood editor, because he was going to write all about Hollywood. And he said, "Ralph, buy land." Ralph came to him about a year later. He said, "This newspaper's never going to make it." He said, "I've got an opportunity to work for a brand new magazine back east. I'm going to go take that." My dad said, "Okay." He said, "Did you buy any land?" Ralph said, "No, I never bought any land." He said, "Well, good luck. Call me if you need a job." About 3 years later, Ralph calls him and says, "I'd like to come back and go to work for you." My dad says, "Come on out." So Ralph became the Hollywood editor again, or the entertainment editor. And my dad said, "By the way, why did you leave New York?" He said, "That magazine's never going to make it." He says, "Well, what's it called?" He said, "TV Guide." This is a setup. Ralph died in the 90s sometime, and he never bought 1 acre of land. Contrast that to my dad, who took his own advice. He didn't have any money. He bought the kind of land that you buy $1 down and $1 a month or whatever it is, you know, on layaway. And then he got some partners. One of his early partners was Wilbur Clark, who built the Desert Inn. They were good friends, and Wilbur helped him buy some land, which is now the northern part of Green Valley. And it was good that he bought that land, because in the mid-50s, my dad, through his newspaper, was going after the mob guys. And he found a guy named Meyer Lansky in the Thunderbird Hotel, I believe. And of course, that was a front page story, and shortly afterwards, they lost their licenses because you weren't supposed to have the mob in the casino. They all knew the mob was in the casino, you just weren't supposed to flout it. So they took the license away for some period of time. And the mob got really mad at my dad. Can't imagine why. The first person to take the heat for that was my mother, because she played golf and lunched with the ladies at the Desert Inn Country Club, which was, other than Las Vegas Municipal, which was way out on the other side of town, that's where all the social gatherings were, and the golf and all that stuff, and my mother loved to play golf. But all of a sudden, she became persona non grata. The ladies had nothing to do with her. So what does any husband do whose wife's been kicked off a golf course? He builds her a golf course. And that became Paradise Valley Country Club, which is now Wild Horse, the city's golf course. And he did that in 1959. Of course, long before Mark met him, he still didn't have any money. So how do you build a golf course when you don't have any money and you've got these giant volcanic rocks all over your property? This was all volcanic area. Well, he put an ad in his paper saying free decorative rock. You know, you pick it up, you carry it, it's yours. And in about 2 weeks, everybody with a pickup truck cleared the land, at least enough so they could grade it for the golf course. He built the golf course, and as he did that, he kept buying some other land around it because he really believed, not only in the valley, but he believed in Henderson. He was probably he certainly was the only newspaper guy to ever take an interest in Henderson with the boys' clubs and all the things that they were doing here. Sponsored them all, sponsored Rose de Lima. In fact, when I was 4 years old, the only memory I have when I was 4 years old was walking into Rose de Lima Hospital, holding a nun's hand, and they put me on a bed and they said, count, and the next thing I know I was eating ice cream because I had my tonsils taken out. And I was 4, that's the only memory I have, but it was in Henderson, of course. There's always been a great relationship with my parents and Henderson, and so when the time came to bid on this land, there were 2 things that happened. I'm not going to tell you who all the bidders were on the land, but some of them were very well-known people here. Even people who had been to a clandestine type meeting about 10 or 11 years earlier that they invited my dad to for some reason. And it was about the federal government turning over Henderson to the people, making it a city, and how these guys were going to get in and cut it up. And so the 10 or 12 people would prosper from this and basically screw everybody else. And so my dad left the meeting and, of course, made sure that that never happened. But it always stuck in his mind that if people are going to come out here and develop, they're going to do it for the benefit of the people who are buying homes and investing in the community. So when Mark alluded to that my dad's commitment was to do the very best he can, still without money, he caught a city council of Henderson who wanted the exact same thing. It was a tiny town. It was maybe 5th or 6th largest, assuming there were 5 or 6 other cities in Nevada. And it had every complex that a place called Hooterville could have. And but it wanted to get big, and it had this opportunity. So part of the deal my dad made, which was good for him and good for the city, was he took the land that he had already put together and annexed it into the city of Henderson along with the land that he got. Well, it gave, I didn't realize it was so difficult, but it gave the opportunity for power and water and everything from the city that he would have had to somehow bring in from unincorporated Clark County, which is not what Clark County is today. And it just made it that much easier. Plus, he could focus on the city of Henderson. They wanted the same things. They wanted a first-class community where people would be proud to live and call Henderson home. And yeah, I remember all the fights. Mark, you left about the time the Green Valley Henderson fight was reaching a crescendo. And I had to figure that one out because, I got the mail. You go to the store, you hear from people, let's call it Green Valley. We don't want to be part of Henderson. And, you just knew in your gut that was the wrong answer. You understood it. It was around the same time, what's a place called up in the lakes that they didn't want to be called Las Vegas? They had to be called the Lakes, for Citibank. People were, they didn't like that, the Lakes. They called it the Lakes. They wouldn't call it Las Vegas. And so people kind of got that idea. In any event, there was a commitment made way, way, way back when. And, we stuck to it. Mark certainly stuck to it, and he won't tell this story because Brad showed you a slide with no gas stations on it. Well, there is one gas station, and I will not take the heat for that. That happened after my tenure. But the lesson I learned from Mark when we needed money badly, we always needed money badly. He had an opportunity from a huge gas station operator to sell them a corner for more money than we ever knew existed. And we talked about it. I said, what's your view? He said, we made a commitment, no gas stations. We'll find another way to get the money. You remember that? So he didn't sell it, and he struggled. But it was the right decision. And I think the people who bought homes here and invested here in the schools and the parks and all that stuff appreciated the fact that we built a city or a town that helped build a city. And just to cap it off, and if you're going to have questions, that's great. Just before my dad passed away, I put him in the car and I drove him out to Green Valley. He hadn't been out in a good while. And at that time, of course, the freeway wasn't built. It was not even on the drawing boards, I don't believe. I think Windmill was under construction or was built. and that was about it. Everything else was dirt coming south. But we passed a couple of churches, and we passed some schools, and we passed some homes. And I said to my dad, we did a documentary a few years ago, just while I digress, and Steve Wynn talked in it about sitting in a room with my father and Jerry Mack and Perry Thomas many times. Perry Thomas, as you know, is the banker, Thomas and Mack, and so is Jerry Mack. He said he would sit in a room and he would listen to those three talk about what Las Vegas was going to look like in 20 and 30 and 40 years. He said when he was a kid, when Steve was a kid, he used to listen to that. And he said, and sure enough, if it didn't come true almost to every hotel, every stick in the ground, they saw it. My dad had a way of seeing it, you know. So I'm driving out with him. I can't see past the hood of the car. And I'm asking him, did you really envision all that you see now in Green Valley? Did you see all the homes and the people living here and the churches and the schools and all that stuff? And he just looked at me and said, yes, I did. I'm thinking, I hate him. No. And then he looked at me and he said, but I was wrong in one respect. I said, what was that? He said, I thought my grandchildren would build it. And that epitomized Las Vegas to me. None of us, no matter what part of this valley we live in, could ever have envisioned the growth of Las Vegas in less than one generation. To go from 15,000 people when I was born to over 2 million people, even with the crash, over 2 million people. No place else has done that. No one could have called it. I mean, I remember in the early days, and I'm sure you remember, Mark and Bob, the city, didn't matter what the city is, they build a new road with a 6-inch line, and then a year later they came back to put a 9-inch line, and then 2 years later they came back and tore it up and put a 12-inch line, whatever the number of inches were, because they couldn't believe themselves that they should have put the larger line in the first place. They would have saved a fortune, they would have saved all the aggravation that we go through every day, even now, but they couldn't believe it. And he couldn't believe all the growth. He thought his grandchildren would build it, which, and I'll end with a story from the Talmud, the Jewish Bible, if you will, about the man building a fig tree, the old man, he's planting a little fig tree. And they asked him, why are you planting a fig tree? You will never live to enjoy the fruit. He said, no, I won't. He said, but my children and their children will. And that, to me, is the kind of vision every community needs. Doesn't matter what the area is. You need that kind of vision to build for many tomorrows out, because we get in a trap in our lives where we want to build for the next quarter or the next year. And it takes the people who can see and take all the slings and arrows, who can see well into the future and push loudly and strongly to follow that particular vision. That's why we're sitting here. That's why Henderson is the second largest city in the state of Nevada, could possibly become the first, and the best city as far as I'm concerned. In terms of, I live here, I'm proud to live here, and that's the story. You know, nothing happens by accident. So that's all I know.
Okay, we have a couple of questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. First, it's not a question, but it's direction to me, and I've been married 38 years, so I take direction well. I'm to remind you to take a look at the displays in the lobby as you go out. We have some displays from the American Nevada Corporation showing what the area looked like in 1978 and in 2005, so you can look a little closer at what you were seeing up here. Now, for Mark, can you tell us about the start of Green Valley Grocery and your meeting with Mr. Smith of Smith's Food King?
Well, back in the early days, when we started to get some, can you hear me? We started to get some housing, and one of the things, you know, we needed to have, we couldn't get a grocery, no grocery store was going to come out with 100, 200 homes. So we wanted to get some kind of convenience shop. You know, it's just important for people moving out that far that have some kind of convenience shopping that would be in their neighborhood. Never pass up a bathroom, that's what I say. At a certain age, right? Anyway, so we went and said, hey, we got to put a convenience store here. Well, you know, we didn't want to have 7-Eleven at the entrance to, we were trying to make a statement of what we wanted. So we went out and we said we wanted to create a concept. We want someone to come in who created a concept, who had experience in convenience stores. And we found a young man came to us and who was running a 7-Eleven on the other side of town. And he said, and he made a deal with us. He was perfect. He knew how to run a 7-Eleven. He could make it personal. It was a community operator. You walk in, you know, the owner was there. I mean, it was, we wanted to make it, you know, personal and a sense of community. Well, the first part of it was, you know, we here at the entrance to Green Valley, he gives us the name. He wants to call it the Midget Market. I said, like, that's not what I had in mind. If I was going to do that, I might as well bring a 7-Eleven in. I mean, the Midget Market doesn't say anything. I said, you need to call it the Green Valley Market, right? Anyway, the point was he kept the name Green Valley. He was very successful. He went on to build 30 more markets around town. You've probably seen him everywhere. His name was Rick Crawford. I mean, like I said, I found him as a general manager in a 7-Eleven, and he turned out to build this tremendous empire of convenience stores all over town, which one of the great success stories of Las Vegas. My mistake was not taking a piece of everything he did, because what he did. But I'll say one thing about Rick Crawford. He was a stand-up guy. He gives back to this community in so many, you know, so many times people make money and it's just a mixture how much money they collect and what they can do. But this family gives back to Las Vegas on a regular basis, and I'm very proud of the fact that he got to start there. We knew each other way back when. We were both trying to figure it out, and he figured it out. He did a great job. I guess I may have figured it out too, but you never know. I'll find out, you know, at the eulogy. Did he know? And the other part of it, the Smith's Food King, getting Smith's Food King, we never even dreamt that we were early enough in the game to bring a supermarket into Green Valley. And what we did was when people worked, you know, to kind of create a sense of community, and everybody who moved to Green Valley got a welcome bag. And we'd go out to all the different vendors in the areas, and we'd give them coupons and discounts, you know, so they felt when they felt they got something, they were part of a community. They moved into something that was good. So anyway, I think we went to Smith's Food King, and then we asked for discount things and things like that, and I don't know how far away they were, and the local region manager says, well, what's going on here? What are you guys doing? So, you know, he comes into the office, and we show him this master plan. He says, oh, D. Smith has got to see this. So anyway, he tells D. Smith about it, and D. Smith, who was the chairman, president of Smith's Food King at the time, he flies into town. We give him a tour, and he decided that, you know, he didn't want to wait until Green Valley was ready, because he may not be the guy selected, and he made a big bet on us and built a 40,000 square foot grocery store at the entrance of Green Valley, probably years before it normally would have happened. But the point was, we didn't go out and solicit to build a grocery store because we didn't think anybody were even ready for that conversation. And here they come to us and they say, this is where we want to be. We want you to build us a store. And it was an amazing story that the president of this company was personally involved. I go to Salt Lake to meet with him. He picks me up at the airport. It was very personal. And I think that because he was such a personal guy and ran his company that way, I think maybe he related to what the potential of a master plan community in Las Vegas could mean, and being a part of it and being right at the entrance. So that's my D. Smith, Smith's Food King, and Rick Crawford story. Rick's doing great, by the way. And he's a big supporter of the Philharmonic, which makes you happy.
No, mine at all, no. This one's for Brad. Can you talk about the uproar over building Green Valley Ranch Casino near a residential area?
For Brad or me?
Either one. Do we have them? Is it all right for anybody? Yes, okay. Take it.
Brian can tell you the deal. I don't know if we have enough time. When Green Valley Ranch was going through the processing entitlement phase, and we had this area zoned to be commercial and potentially hotel, we kind of threw out an idea that there would be a casino there, and it didn't have any height limits on it. And we went to, I think, one public meeting down at the convention center, and there were, yeah, no, I think it's Rick over there. It's the blue light in my eye. I think there were 600 people in the room and another 500 outside the room, all protesting the idea that we were going to build a casino. So we said, okay, we'll scrap that, we'll go back and do our homework. So we took 9 months of meeting time with the neighborhoods, going through what will they accept in the idea of there's going to be a hotel casino here. We knew that we could build something, a hotel casino, and we had to figure out how to build it to make the neighborhood happy. So we went through umpteen hearings and applications. We ended up with an 80-foot height limit. As you saw, the master plans were part of it, and we spent in some
It's because you're holding the mic low. Put your, no, put your hand higher. Yeah,
or down by the connection.
yeah.
So there were some nights. I don't need a mic. Yeah. So let's say there were nights, or weeks through the processing where we spent 5 nights a week with neighborhood meeting people, and we had created 2 task forces of neighbors to come in, one at 6 o'clock and one at 9 o'clock, and we spent untold hours getting this thing processed and all the design guidelines and all the architecture that had to be done. And that was to get to the point where then Brian could make the deal with who was going to be in there. So I'll let you finish that part.
You know, I remember it very differently. I never saw a protester, I never heard a problem. In part, yeah, all that happened. But we knew that what we were going to build was going to enhance the area and not detract from it. And most of what we were hearing was people just afraid of what they thought, what they were hearing, what they thought was going to happen. It happens a lot. It's kind of like what I said, you know, the people who come out and protest many times, once they learn what the facts are, they say, oh, sounds pretty good. I think what helped us when we did this, we were entitled to build more than one casino. I think we could have built 3 or 4 all along what is now 215. And we not agreed, no one asked us to. We told the city, we're only going to build 1. This is not about making, you know, a fortune of money by selling land to casinos. This is about bringing out an amenity to the area that we absolutely knew was needed. But it was different, it was changed. And I think what really pushed it over the top at the end of the day was that we had kept, and the city of Henderson had kept our commitments all the way through. And when we finally stood up there and said, this is what we're going to do, we're not going to do any more, and this is that, they just believed, people believed us. And I think the proof's in the pudding. Green Valley Ranch has been a great addition to the Green Valley area and to Henderson. It became a huge taxpayer in Henderson. It allowed many other things to happen. So, but again, it's about goodwill. It's about keeping your word. It's about telling people you're going to do something and you do it, and then they trust you the next time. We all see what happens when that doesn't happen. And Brad never invited me to the Laverne meeting. Thank you. Well, then I didn't go.
He was already busy.
Well, this one says for Brad as well. There was apparently a study suggesting 3 routes for the 215, 3 different routes. What were they and how did they decide on the final route?
You're testing my memory, but as I recall, there was one north of Sunset Road, up near Patrick, I believe. And then there's another one right through the middle of Green Valley along
Pebble.
Oh, there you go. Somebody knows. And then there was obviously the old Henderson Highway, which was already public corridor, public highway. And I can't tell you why they made that decision. I think I can guess, and you probably can too. That NDOT made it, and by putting it where it is today, it serves a lot more of what was going to be the future development along the south edge of the valley. So they, you know, they look at how many people are gonna drive on that freeway, and the best location was to move it down to Henderson Highway, take advantage of the existing public right-of-ways that didn't have to buy as much, and didn't have to condemn any houses, there weren't any out there. And I think they got a little bit of right-of-way from us, which is from Pebble, or from Pecos west. There was a little bit there that we gave them, or they bought, I can't remember what happened. That's how I believe they got the choice.
Okay. This is just to all of you, thank you for Green Valley from the audience. And
Thank you, whoever wrote that.
and what became of the beautiful carousel at the district?
Bruce isn't here, I don't think. The guy who got rid of it isn't here, we'll blame it on him. It was a great idea.
His idea, he took it with him, right?
It was a great idea, that we just didn't get enough kids using it, I guess.
Okay. This is for everyone. I don't know this name. Where is Bernie Funagali today? Anybody know?
Oh, Bernie from the dog.
Question on the card.
Was that a leftover from another meeting? That's a stumper.
This is an interesting one, one we see all over the valley. Why walls around the housing areas?
Wide walls around the housing areas. That's a Vegas thing. We're in the desert. It's privacy. It's you can't get, you know, you have to. Everybody's got a wall. It's in the east we have landscaping and things like that. You don't see the kind of walls you get here.
Are you talking about wall communities or wall?
Yeah, well, community
Wall
areas.
communities.
Yeah. It's a privacy thing. It's a security thing. It's just the way that Vegas has evolved. And I don't know. And we put so much density on a piece of property that you've got to have these walls in order to protect it. If there was less density, maybe you wouldn't need it. I think there's a lot of security. It's multiple reasons.
Some of it's pool, because if you have a swimming pool, you have to have a 5-foot non-monolithic fence or walls. And the walls are 6 foot. We're scared.
Yeah, very cool.
Very cool. If you look at the tradition of communities built in the desert, walls are used to break the breezes and the winds that come, control the dust, and there's a lot of almost environmental reasons to build walls. I know everybody that comes from out of town says, I don't like the walls, I want to move someplace where there's no walls. Well, I'm not sure where that is.
They don't want small pets. The problem with the walls is they never put it, with the lack of HOA, in 5-10 years, these walls start looking unsightly and there's no way to maintain them. And you'll see that there's built-in obsolescence in neighborhoods. You know, in 10 years, people go further and further out. And I think in the planned communities, especially as they evolve with HOAs, there is a timelessness to the common areas because there's a vehicle to maintain them.
Good. Then we have a question on the story of the history of Green Valley newspaper at its start. Not sure which newspaper that is.
The Green Valley News?
The Green Valley News.
When I was there, we started, it was another vehicle. We were in the publishing business, Hank was in the public, it was a vehicle for us to actually start writing our own public relations and distributing with the newspaper. Everybody lived in Green Valley, which kind of, again, made it feel more like a community, that they're their own community. You pick pictures of kids that are, you know, in their Easter outfits, and, you know, all that kind of stuff that people love, you know, to read about.
Okay, there was also a second.
I mean, it evolved into a full newspaper at some point.
Mike Callahan was the editor?
Right.
Yes. And so there's a question on
It was part of the Henderson and Green Valley News.
Oh, okay.
The Henderson Home News was a newspaper, I believe, was started by a guy named Maury Zenoff, way back when, 100 years ago. And Maury was a good guy and a good friend of ours, and as he decided he wanted to get out, we bought his newspaper. And that was about the same time that Michael Callahan was getting out of the governor's office and came to work with us. So he he didn't grow up in Boulder City and Henderson, but he lived there for a long time, taught there for a long time. And we said, this is perfect. He's close to the ground. He knows the people. So he became the publisher of the Green Valley News and the Henderson Home News at the time. And then we grew them all around the valley, and then, you know, finances changed that. It was tough. But originally it was the Henderson Home News, which was here for a long, long, long time. But again, you know, people grew out of it. They weren't interested in little community news. Now, the irony is, those are the kind of newspapers that are surviving in today's world, not the big city newspapers, but the small community newspapers. So maybe we'll start again.
Okay, and just the final one, thank you all. I made a killing on my first home.
You bought a 10-acre lot back in the 70s, should really thank us.
Do we have any final questions from the audience? Yes,
I don't
ma'am?
know a lot about your dad, but I know your mom did a wonderful thing. Like she donated the money for the Women's Rec Center. Because I had over 80 volunteer hours volunteering there.
Thank you for that. Yeah, she was very proud of that.
It's a wonderful facility.
Thank you.
Okay, and comment, love the bicycle trails. My wife and I can bike 60 miles from our house with only about 3 miles on city streets. Is there ever going to be a bike trail connection to the River Mountain Trail? I think that's a more recent part of that.
Well, there are trails that start by Boulder Highway, like in that, they call it, like Las Vegas and River Run.
All right, we have one question back here.
I've lived in the valley for 30 years and boy, did you know, enjoy living in the Green Valley, Henderson area. But where were the first homes built?
In Green Valley?
In Green, whether it was truly in Green Valley, what neighborhood was it?
Well, there were some homes that were started, when you first come into Green Valley on the right-hand side, you're right behind that office building where the first homes were built. That guy went out of business. And then we eventually got RD to buy the rest of the lots, and they tested the market, and that's what gave them the stimulus to buy 100 acres from us to really help us get it started.
So it wasn't the homes by Green Valley High School?
I think that was all vacant land. This was.
Yeah, I picture around the Green Valley grocery.
This is
It
heavy.
was across the street from the Green Valley Grocery.
Okay.
On the fire side.
That's where that first fire department was.
We used to celebrate lifting of light poles. Remember, we used to have public relations, and then we would lift the light pole. But just, Brad mentioned the wash and how the bike trail got started. That wash was very wide, and the cost to improve it, to reclaim all that land, would have been unbelievable. And I had a philosophy today, it was called, you can't fix it, feature it. So we never touched the wash. We said, we're leaving it in the natural condition because we want to be a good partner, but we really, in reality, we could have, you know, if we had the money, we could have probably recaptured a lot of developed property. And we put this bike trail, it was a 1 mile bike trail, you know, because it didn't go anywhere. But, you know, it's just funny how things evolve, and everybody picks up on that, and it just grew and grew, and it's like, you know, one of the great amenities of Green Valley is that bike trail system.
One thing I noticed about Green Valley, I tell people, they know they're in Green Valley, if the light poles are concrete.
Right.
If they're not concrete, you're in unincorporated Clark County or whatever. So how did the concrete light poles come to be? Was that part of the master plan?
It was just, you know, an inexpensive way to differentiate ourselves, you know, we wanted to.
People who were driving in Green Valley were drunk. So.
Well, it's more expensive to replace that thing, but I just wondered how it came to be.
It was really a way to differentiate ourselves and make it feel.
There's a story behind it.
By the way, I have a little piece of trivia. It has nothing to do with, well, it has a lot to do with Green Valley. The very first subscriber to what was then Community Cable TV and now is Cox was Mark Klein. Remember that?
That would be a subject for another event.
When the statute of limitations runs.
right, well, I want to thank our panelists tonight. This is Pat.